Right, welcome everyone to the June new member training with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. It's June 21st, 2023. My name is Tim Heishman, and I'm an Advocacy Teams trainer with FCNL. And I'm so excited that you're here, that you want to get involved with advocacy in your local community. And I'm really excited to share some of the core skills needed to lobby Congress for peace and justice. So I know or emailed with some of you, so I think there's at least a few who are already connected with an advocacy team, which is great. Others probably looking to connect, which is also good. You're in the right place. So this 1 hour session is a short intro into what the teams that you'll be joining have been through. So the teams, when they launch, go through a 3 or 4 part training series, 3 or 4 1 hour sessions over a couple weeks. And this is sort of like a good summary of that. And so you'll be, mostly up to speed, and you can continue learning by looking at the training workbook and attending Zoom calls with the network and just being a part of the community. So as we get started, let's take just a moment to get to know each other. I'll put the questions I want to ask you here in the chat, and I'll also read them out. So you can either unmute or just respond in the chat. But I'd love to know your name and what excites you about being here, where you're calling in from, if you're comfortable, and then are you already on a team? So a couple questions, you can pick 2 or pick all 4. But who wants to start?
Oh, I'll start. Oh, I'm Mary Larson. I'm on a team, New Jersey Advocacy, and I've met the people on the team and I like them very, very much. And I'm excited at meeting Robert Menendez, my representative, son of Senator Menendez. He's very new, and I'm excited about trying out these peaceful lobbying techniques with him.
Excellent. That's a wonderful team in New Jersey, so you'll be in good hands. Anna, did I see your hand as well?
Sure, I'll go. I'm here in Lansing. I've been a peace activist for a long time, so I know a lot of the members in the Lansing Advocacy Team. One of them, Margaret Nielsen, was my professor in the 1980s, and so we go way back. And I'm excited to join because, if I'm remembering the question, I absolutely love the Quakers. I think they've, been important and powerful all throughout history for so many different movements. And I love the team that I've met so far. I love the work, and so I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. Just want to say hi to James, who's from New York City, looking to join a team. So welcome, James. And Stephanie from Tucson, excited about the clarity and organization FCNL brings to citizen lobbying. Wonderful. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. My name's Kevin. I am the one that had the head that was flipped upside down, and I don't use Zoom very much. At work, we use Teams, so I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So you got the standard work headshot there. So that's pretty much what I look like. And the lighting is much better at work than it is here in my basement. So I am from the Kansas City, Missouri area. The group that I'm working with is the Independence Missouri FCNL Advocacy Group, led by Steve Kellogg. I've actually been on a couple visits with them to Jefferson City, and also a virtual visit with one of our local reps. So I feel like, and my wife and daughter have both been on the team as well. So I feel like they're rolling off doing some other things, and they're like, hey, why don't you do this? So I'm here excited, but I kind of already feel like I have a little bit of a head start.
Fantastic. That's wonderful.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
I'm Barbara Kelly from Broomfield, Colorado. I started typing in my chat response to your questions, and then I decided to tell you all. I've been introduced to the Colorado team, but have not really been any part of it yet, although I will be visiting my representative in July. Why am I excited about FCNL? Lots of reasons. The main one, I think, being that I lobby by myself a lot. It will be nice, I think, to have the support of a group, and I'm particularly looking forward to the training. I write emails, I get responses that don't necessarily address what I wrote about. I'd like to feel more professional about lobbying.
Wonderful. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
I'm Ann Langevin, and I'm from Boulder City, Nevada. I just met the FCNL team last week, and Lori and her husband, this is the Las Vegas team, and Lori and her husband were so enthusiastic about the training that I decided to sign up for it right away. And so I'm very much looking forward to this, because I've lobbied for libraries for years. So this is a different experience, a different way of looking at things, and a different approach, I think. So yeah. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Wonderful. Well, it's so fun to hear all of the reasons that you're excited to be here, and your hopes for the training. So this is just perfect. I want to encourage you, we didn't get to everyone, but please continue using the chat to introduce yourself so we can keep getting to know one another. And I also neglected to give a special welcome to my colleague Sarah, who's our Deputy Director of Strategic Advocacy, who is here supporting us tonight. So it's great to have Sarah as well. So I'd like to get started with one of my favorite quotes. Oh my goodness! And yes, Heidi. I'm so sorry. Heidi Van Aert is one of our regional anchors, so she supports the Northwest region of the United States as well. And it's so good to have you here too.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm here to learn with everybody else. I always love these trainings because FCNL has such a completely different approach than any of the other organizations I've been involved with. So thank you for this.
You're so welcome. Yeah. All right. So if I can share my screen here, I want to share this quote from John Lewis to center us as we get started. So he said, "Ours is not the struggle of one day or 1 week or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part." And the reason that this quote sticks out to me so much is that it really speaks well to the kind of work that we try to do at FCNL, to advocate in a persistent and prophetic or faith-led fashion to make sure that Congress is prioritizing the issues that really matter to us as constituents and advocates and activists around the country. So here's a brief agenda for our time tonight. I'd like to begin talking about a little bit about the background of FCNL and Advocacy Teams, so you get a sense of the program that you're joining. And then I'd like to talk about the importance of storytelling and how sharing a personal story can be your most powerful tool as an advocate to affect change. It's a way that we can connect across the aisle with people we disagree with and slowly but surely move the needle on policy campaigns that we care about. And then we'll go over, sort of demystify the lobby visit. Some of you have already been on one, so I hope you'll chime in on your experiences. But we'll look over the lobby visit roadmap, we call it, or sort of the agenda that you can use to be prepared and confident for your first lobby visit as an advocacy team. And then we'll take a brief look at our website and a lot of the resources you can lean on as you do this work. So let me find my bar was hiding at the end here, but stop share. and would love to hear if anyone wants to share. What do you know about FCNL? What is your experience? What does FCNL do? What do you know already about FCNL? And that's okay if you don't know, that's why we're here, but yeah, Anna, go ahead.
What I know might not be complete, but what I know from our local advocacy team, the advocacy team picks one issue for a year and works very closely with their members of Congress to advance that issue, and other teams all over the country are also working on the same issue, and they may keep it for more than 1 year, like the authorization for the use of military, whatever, I can't remember the acronym, but yeah, and they meet once a month with Sarah, and then I know our team meets the next day after that.
Amazing. That's so right. Yeah, the advocacy teams do focus on one issue because our theory is that if we all put our weight behind one issue, we can see that move a lot faster than if we, were to do, 30 different issues or something. So, but we can also focus on other issues as well. But yeah, excellent. What else? What else do you know? Yeah, Joan? Go ahead.
Do the famous unmute. We have, since I got on, you haven't had to say that, but I'm sure it would come up soon if I didn't say it. Anyway, yeah, I was going to say what I know about FCNL is that my mother was part of it, like, 40, 50 years ago, and on a national, sort of a national level in a different format. And also, as far as the lobbying, I've participated in several of our local lobbying visits, and I'm putting that in the chat, so you'll have it. But anyway, I'm looking forward to learning, but I'm at a stage of life at 80 where I'm pulling back rather than adding on responsibilities. Thank you for all the work, everybody.
There you go. Yeah. And you're right. FCNL has been at this for a long time, as you alluded to. And today we actually had a big call where we celebrated our 80th anniversary as an organization. So we've been on Capitol Hill for 80 years, right across from the Senate office building, and have been working on a whole host of peace and justice related issues. Anything else that you want to add? You all know so much already.
I guess I just want to note that in my experience thus far, you're very well organized, much more so than many other groups that I've been a part of in the past. And I'm appreciative of that. So thank you for your efforts.
You're welcome. That is what we strive to do. So, yes, I see a hand at the top of the screen. Go ahead.
Is that hand me?
That is you. Go ahead.
I'm Jeff.
Jeff.
I know that FCNL was created as a way where conscientious objectors would be recognized and not be forced to. They could be in the armed services and they could help in any way. They just can't kill anybody. And FCNL has been all about discussion, negotiation over violent conflict.
You're 100% right. That's great, and I'm glad you pulled out the history of supporting conscientious objectors as well. That's been a big part. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, for filling in a lot of the details, and I'll just kind of fast forward through FCNL's history to about 8 years ago, which is when sort of dawned on FCNL that, wow, we have this sort of knowledge, this expertise. We've been lobbying on Capitol Hill. Why don't we share that knowledge with everybody, with you all across the country, put it in your hands so that you can lobby your members at the same time that our paid lobbyists are doing that in Washington, D.C. And it took off. So We started with 7 or 8 teams in 2015. And in the years since, we've launched over 130 teams in 47 states. Is that right, Sarah? We have 3 to go. So we're in 47 states plus DC, approaching 50, which is really exciting. And it's a community as well. So we offer support and training and resources so that you can do this work. The advocacy teams work closely with our policy staff and work as effectively as we can to bring members of Congress on board with legislation we care about. So that's a little bit about FCNL and advocacy teams. And this is a long process. Doing this work is it's not the kind of work where you expect to get a huge win tomorrow, but we're in this for the long haul. And so that's why it's so helpful to have 1,000 or 1,500 other folks doing this work around the country and getting on Zoom calls and sharing best practices. So that's a little intro. And now I'd like to talk about storytelling. And a couple of you alluded to or mentioned the fact that FCNL has a different approach to lobbying. And I think this is where it becomes really apparent, is through speaking from our personal experience and from our stories. So you'll hear myself and Sarah and Heidi and others at FCNL talk a lot about the importance of storytelling. And as I said earlier, this is the way that we try to communicate across the aisle with those that we disagree with, which is becoming harder and harder, but storytelling is one way to try to maintain those bonds. And so with the FCNL approach, you don't walk into the office of your member of Congress and sit down and recite statistics and facts and talking points. Of course, we bring facts and relevant information, but we first center the meeting by sharing a 90-second story that illustrates our values and why our values are tied to this specific issue. And that allows us to find common ground, even when we might think, I could never do that with my member. It's surprising and wonderful how this method works. So, and one of the great things about being on a team, as opposed to doing this alone, is that you have others that you can strategize with and say, here's what I'm thinking of sharing about my story. What feedback do you have for me? How can I make this stronger? Which is so amazing. And the neat thing is that if your member or the staff member gets pulled away from the meeting that they're having with you, the likelihood that they remember a story that you shared from your heart is pretty high. The staffers on Capitol Hill that I've met get policy briefing books and stats all day long, but when they can hear a story from the heart, that's going to stick with them. So we encourage our advocacy team members to think of a story that demonstrates why you came to work for peace and justice, why you're on this call, why you care. And this year, our campaign is about investing in peace. So as someone noted earlier, we've tried to repeal the Iraq war authorizations, prevent war with Yemen and North Korea, and do all of this anti-war stuff. And folks on Capitol Hill know us, and they get what we're about, but they started to ask, well, if war's not the answer, what is? And so we decided it was really important that we also gave that answer too, of what the answer is. So that's why we chose to focus on investing in peace. You can learn a lot more about this campaign, but the gist of it is that there's 3 accounts that the government funds to seek to prevent or stop or transform conflicts breaking out around the world. And because it's a lot easier to stop a conflict in its infancy than it is to intervene in a full-blown war. So it's extremely affordable to work that way. And we're trying to get Congress to boost funding in these really, really important accounts. We can get into that more later if you want. But back to storytelling, your story doesn't have to be a dramatic event. You don't have to have traipsed through Iraq or North Korea to have an impactful story on Capitol Hill. And it's actually maybe a bit just as powerful, if not more, to have a story of why does someone in Pennsylvania or Nevada or Virginia care about peacemaking and can make that case to your member. So think about your childhood or your faith, your education or tradition or career, your family. And these kind of stories can, even simple stories, can help us come up with a great story for a lobby visit. So I want to share another quote with you. Here's a theme. And this one comes from one of the leading thinkers on storytelling, Marshall Gantz. He says, "We don't talk about values in abstractions. We talk about values and share them through the language of stories, because stories are what enable us to communicate our values to one another." All right, so let's dive into what makes for a good story. So they're not limited to this, but there are a couple different ways that you can frame your story. So one of those is a turning point story. So this would be crafting a story about a moment when you realized something was a problem. So maybe you were dropping your kids off to school, you were listening to the radio, and it just hit you that such and such mattered. That can be a powerful story. A moral values story is a story that describes a moment or an experience that shaped your values based on your faith, your upbringing, or your life. So it might be, I was raised in a Quaker meeting and I was taught that there are better ways to resolve conflict than violence, and this is why I'm here today, or something like that. And then a personal impact story, depending on the issue, you may have one or not, but this story describes a firsthand experience in your life that motivates you to advocate on a legislative issue. So for FCNL's annual meeting, a year or two ago, we lobbied on the child tax credit. And as a parent of 2 young kids, I definitely noticed when that was taken away. And so I could tell a personal impact story on that issue. And in terms of crafting the story itself, it's helpful to frame the issue through an individual moment or an experience. So if you can think about, where you were or who you were with when you had a certain realization, that can be really impactful. To try to identify your values from the moment or experience is also really helpful. If the story can illustrate the values that you want to express in hopes of finding common ground as a way to humanize the issue, that can be really effective as well. And finally, try to connect your story to the policy issue and the ask. And the way that I do this often is to just end my story with a simple sentence like, and that's why I'm here to ask you to invest in these really important peace building accounts. Just bringing it home at the end really ties it up for the listener. Now, if you're like me, it's tempting. If I'm not careful, my story could be 5 or 6 minutes, but lobby visits are only about 30 minutes long. And so it's really important to have a story that's short, that's memorable. An image that I like is maybe you'll catch your member in the elevator, and the elevator ride isn't going to be 6 minutes long. It's going to be maybe 90 seconds at the most. We actually had an advocacy team member recently who had that exact experience, had a minute or two in an elevator with Jerry Nadler in New York. So I'm sure she had her story ready, knowing her. Yeah, well, I would like to share a story that I wrote back in January as I thought about our issue to invest in peace. And I'll share that as an example for you. And then if you can be thinking about what values I'm trying to express, I'll invite you to share any reflections along those lines at the end. So imagine yourselves as congressional staff, and the talking stick's just been turned over to me. So, well, thank you so much for meeting with us today. I want to share an experience with you that helped me realize why it's so important to invest in peace. Thinking back to when I just graduated college, I spent a year doing volunteer service, and I was working at an after-school program for at-risk youth in Baltimore, Maryland, and I had the privilege of mentoring a class of 7th grade students after school. And I loved the work, I loved the material and the students, but it was so frustrating that every day students got into fights or shouting matches, and it's like my lessons just got derailed. And so I was doing a lot of thinking about how to move past that or move through that. And as I drove home from work, I thought back to when I was a child and I took a peacemaking class at my church that was sort of combined Jesus's teachings with Gandhi's principles. It was really, really unique. And I thought, what if I could teach some of these peace building skills to my students? Well, I did, and it was amazing how when my students had the tools to prevent or work through conflict, how much better or much quicker they could de-escalate the conflicts they found themselves in. Just a little bit of prevention went a long way to a better community. And so that got me excited, thinking that maybe our government could apply the same philosophy to the way that we resolve conflicts. We have these 3 amazing programs, the Complex Crises Fund, Reconciliation Programs, and Atrocities Prevention Fund. And for the cost of less than an F-35 fighter jet, we can really increase the funding for these 3 accounts. So that's why I'm here today, to tell you that peace works, and that for the cost of a fighter jet, we can increase the amount we spend on peace. So that's my sample story. Thanks for listening. And I would love to hear either a value that you identified in the story or someplace that you connected, either in the chat or aloud. Prevention. Yeah. Thrifty use of funds. Yeah. Spot on. Living by your faith. Yeah. Excellent. Good. That means I communicated at least some of what I wanted to communicate. So that's just an example, but as you go forward, getting connected with your team and thinking more about this, try to think of a moment like that in your life where you might connect to using money wisely or saving lives or whatever it may be that kind of helps you connect here. Before we move on from storytelling, I want to share a quick story about how storytelling can really impact a lobby visit in ways that you might not anticipate. So someone mentioned the campaign we had 2 years ago to repeal the Iraq War authorization. And we had a team where a member had a story about a member of his family who had served in war, perhaps a grandfather or a great-grandfather. And that family member came home with severe PTSD from that war experience. And it created a lot of trauma that was passed down through the generations, as it does. And so wanted to share that story with the staff of his senator about, why going to war is costly and why we should think really carefully about doing that. And little did he know that the staffer that he would meet with had almost the exact same experience in his family. And it really connected emotionally with that staffer. And that office was the office that ended up introducing our bill in Congress. And so you might prepare a story and it might connect or it might not, but that's why we speak from the heart, is because we're meeting with real people who have real experiences, who care, and we never know whose story might be the one that really leads to a breakthrough. So I love that story for a lot of reasons, but I think it really underscores why storytelling is a unique approach. So, all right. So I want to share my screen again and share an acronym with you called WRAPPED, because I don't know about you, those who have experience doing lobbying, but even after doing this many times, I still feel nervous. And The raft principles here are kind of like a life raft for you when you feel like, what am I doing again? Oh, I forget everything I learned. You can think of raft and feel secure. So this is an acronym, kind of like a life raft. It can give you a structure for telling a quick story to a member of Congress or their staff, or it can be an effective way to compose a media publication, like a letter to the editor. So RAFT stands for respond. And when we respond to something, we thank our member of Congress for something that they've done in the past. Starting your meeting by thanking a member can set a relationship building tone, can let the office know you're there to build relationship and not to just attack. The ask is the one specific thing that we want the member to do after our visit with them. F is for facts. Just as an example, someone mentioned saving money, and we've found that spending $1 on peace saves $16 on the cost of conflict. So finding a fact like that can be really helpful. And then the T is for tying in your personal story to your roles and relationships within your community. So as I think about the story that I shared, I had a simple ask. My ask was to fund the peace building accounts. Facts, I had the fact about the fighter jet and how much it cost. I shared my personal story of doing volunteer service. And as I think about it, I probably could have had a better way to start the story, a tie-in or a response. But you can kind of see how this works, in crafting a story. But let me pause there, even while I have this shared, to see if anyone has questions about storytelling. I know I went over the RAFT principles fairly quickly, but any questions up to this point? I can stop sharing so we can see each other. And that's okay. I know it's a lot to absorb. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
I'm in Manhattan, and it's kind of like preaching to the choir in Manhattan. You go in and, we're a lot like-minded with our representatives. What's it like when you hit a brick wall, when you're with somebody that is totally antithesis of what our values and consciousness is, and you've got your story and you see that it's not resonating? What's it like?
That is a good question. And yeah, we have teams who almost always agree with their members and almost never do. And so I find that both struggle in both situations. And I think what I would share first is that it's not an overnight process. I'm thinking of a senator in Iowa that our team in Iowa was lobbying. We do have someone from Iowa here, so that's exciting. They were lobbying Senator Grassley, I think, for 5 or 6 years to support the Iraq War Authorization repeal. And it took that long to convince him, but how exciting when they did convince him, So I think just remember that it's slow work, but it's really, really important work. And it might take a couple visits to find the common ground even. And even after you find the common ground, it may take more visits to be on the same page, or you may need to find other folks to bring into your lobby visit. I know there was a team in North Carolina that wasn't getting anywhere, and so they asked the office, well, what would you really need to support this? Because it seems like we're not on the same page or something. And they said, well, we're not necessarily opposed to you, but we just haven't heard from anyone who served in the military on this issue. And so the team said, oh, we need to talk to some veterans in our community because the office wants to hear that perspective. So sometimes it's finding out who they're not hearing from. Sometimes it's you haven't found the common ground yet. So that's why it's valuable to go back time and time again and keep working at it. And Sarah and our policy team and I can help you strategize if you get stuck as well. Yeah. Let's go to, I see Kevin next and then Katie.
Yeah, so just to address that question with another story about running into a brick wall, perceived brick wall. So we were lobbying in Jefferson City, Missouri, to abolish the death penalty, which still is in effect in certain cases in Missouri. And we were down there just a few days before a Missouri resident was about to be executed. And we were making a last minute push. And as you can imagine, we attempted to canvass both Democrat and Republican offices. And I stuck my head into the office that had 2 or 3 representatives of the same party. But one of the 3 offices was the sponsor of the bill that we were opposing. And it made it easier and provided more funding to smaller counties that couldn't afford the death penalty to allow them to do the death penalty, to actually execute people. They wanted to provide funding so that all these rural counties were on an equal playing field financially. And it was, you're just sitting there shaking your head. Well, the person who was sponsoring the bill wasn't there, but the gentleman next door saw me stick my head in and he gave me this look like, please don't come in. And it was the first time I had actually been the leader, like the other offices we'd gone to, I was in the back just listening. And I happened to be the one in the front. So guess who's talking? Me. He eventually invites us into his office, and I'll try to shorten this really quickly. But he was sternly in the same party of the person and knew the person very well who was sponsoring the bill to make it easier to have the death penalty. And so we expected, a talk to the hand kind of moment. But it turns out after establishing a relationship and laughing a little bit, and it turns out this person was a farmer, and we had someone in our group who was a farmer, and we got through all that. And this representative actually opened up, and he said, even though I sit next door to the person sponsoring this bill, I'm not 100% sold on it. And we were like, oh my gosh, an opening. And so we just kept talking. We just kept sort of reinforcing our points, and we had facts, and we had a little bit of stories as well. Although it's hard to speak personally about the death penalty. That's not an easy one to have a story. But anyway, it turned out by the time we finished, and he invited us in, sat down on his couch. There were 6 of us, and we sat down in his office for a while. And he eventually came around and said, you know what, I think I really need to think hard on whether I would support this bill. And it really wasn't for the reason why we were talking about, because of the humanity issues and all those kind of things. It was because he felt like there was an unfair budgeting issue. It was a different motivation for him. It was more about the money, but it got him to stop and think. And even though it wasn't maybe the same reason why, we felt like when we left, we had another person that maybe wasn't necessarily, it was surprising that this person even had an opening. And so my point is that you never know, and you never know what people's rationales are. And it may not match up exactly, but we felt like we had a win because this person listened to us, and it got them to stop and think about it. And, I've had several visits where I've walked into offices and you tell them about a bill and they're like, oh, let me look that up. And they have really no idea what you're even there for. And they don't even know every bill. There's lots of bills out there. And so you'd be surprised at what they do and don't know. So I'll stop there. Sorry for the long story.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that. That is such great experience, and totally concurs with what I've heard from our teams as well. You just never know. And that's why we do this. Sometimes you're educating the member, and sometimes, some of our teams see their members on TV and think this is going to be a train wreck, but they go in and it's amazing, and so, thank you so much. for that. Katie, go ahead.
So I was just going to, this is more of a question, but Sarah was on a call that we had with Senator Sinema's staff. And when we had that call, there weren't very many Arizona folks available. And so I was just wondering, I mean, if you live in a place that's not Arizona, for example, if there is a lot of opportunity for folks in other parts of the country who may not have as many opportunities or whose representatives may already be on board, that those folks might come to some other lobbying effort opportunities.
Yeah. If I understand your question right, you're asking sort of what to do if your members are already on board, or also what to do if you're not near a team. Did I hear you right? Or
Nope.
not quite? Okay, try again. Yeah.
But that's cool. What I was saying is, are there perhaps opportunities for folks, for example, who are in New York to come and help us in Arizona, where we have a lot of folks who we could lobby who are not on the same page as us, because the gentleman in New York said that his representative is sort of like speaking to the choir, which is definitely not the case in Arizona.
I got you. Thank you for telling me again. Yeah, one of the benefits of being part of this community is we can look each other up and ask for advice, or we can connect you. We have an online community where you can create a profile and kind of talk to other people who are doing this work, which I'll share later. But yeah, we do that a lot and give advice to each other. So we can definitely help with that. Yeah.
But I guess I'm asking further, just to clarify further, that it did seem that there were some other folks on our Arizona call who were from other parts of the country. And might that be an opportunity at times that we might reach out to folks in other parts of the country when we have, for example, a Zoom call to say, hey, we have this Zoom call in Arizona. We have a very small team in Arizona, I'll say, and it's a big electorate in Arizona and it's an important state. So I'm just wondering if perhaps I might, for example, ask the gentleman in New York when it comes to be time, or Sarah might, to say, hey, you're already speaking to the choir. Would you like to come on over to Arizona where you're not speaking to the choir and make a compelling argument?
Tim, if I can jump in.
Yeah,
One of the things, Katie, that's very unique about when you guys lobbied is that you lobbied with the lobbyists. This was like a high level, like the lobbyists from DC were like joining in with you, which is almost never the case with the advocacy teams because it's so much more constituent led. What I will say, it's not that can't happen necessarily. It's that members of Congress don't, it won't matter to them if someone from outside their district or their state will join the visit. So we'll sometimes, like, if someone's otherwise going to lobby alone, you could have someone join as, like, some groups call this a silent observer, if you're like in a different district but you kind of want a buddy so you're not there by yourself. But if the office knows that there's non-constituents joining, they either won't take the meeting or they at least won't give that much weight to the meeting. But there are other ways that groups can kind of support, whether that's yeah.
However, I just have to mention that Arizona is a big tourist state. So in Arizona, perhaps differently from other states, I think it potentially could matter when other states, particularly like Chicago, New York, some of those bigger places where there are a lot of tourists that come to Arizona, they may potentially have pulled. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think generally what we hear from staff is that they don't want to have meetings when there's non-constituents in the group, but I think there's other ways to collaborate. Yeah. Tim, I'll throw it back.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And, from what I've heard from talking to congressional staff, they want to know who can vote for them. And I mean, not to put it in those terms, but they're going to give weight to people who can help them keep their job or not. But totally want to think about how we can, build power in Arizona and get more folks involved. And I will say, for the folks who feel like they're preaching to the choir, one of the things I've really appreciated about FCNL is FCNL can always help us think of another ask to push our member, to get them singing in the choir, so to speak, or leading the choir. I mean, we can always push our member to take more and more public leadership on the issue. So we might think, wow, they totally agree with us, but have they made a public statement? Have they talked to their colleagues? What else can they do to advance our issue? So great questions. I'll try to leave some time at the end for more because this is really great. But I do want to make sure we get to the part where we talk about what the actual meeting is like. And some of you know this already, so chime in. But advocacy teams schedule meetings like the ones we've been talking about, like the one Kevin described and Katie and others, with their congressional offices. It's typically a Zoom call or a phone call or an in-person meeting with a staffer, and sometimes the member is there themselves. And this is a substantive conversation, usually 15 to 30 minutes. And our theory of change, which is backed by a lot of research, says that these meetings are way more effective than phone calls and emails. And not to say that phone calls and emails don't matter. I mean, they do, but these kind of in-person meetings really move the needle and make an impression. And so as you prepare for your visit, we highly recommend having like a pre-meeting or a planning meeting before the actual lobby visit, so that you can go over the stories you want to share, the points you want to make, organize your agenda, and just make sure you're really prepared, because it's a special opportunity that you have a few times a year to do this. So you want to make the most of it. And so there's a couple roles that we suggest in the lobby visit, and I'll put these up on the screen for you. We recommend having a group leader, not necessarily someone who's going to do all the talking, but kind of serves as the MC for the visit, keeps things moving, especially if you're on Zoom or a conference call. It's helpful to have someone saying, and now Anna's going to share, and then we're going to go to Steve, or what have you. And then having a note taker is really important. Katie mentioned some of our policy staff in DC joining that lobby visit, which was unusual, but amazing. So when we lobby as advocates, we submit a report back to FCNL later. And so our staff look over all those hundreds of reports that come in, and then they can feed back suggestions to you all on strategy based on what we're hearing across the country. So taking good notes is not only good for that, but also for your team to keep good records as you build a relationship with your member. And then you'll have some storytellers who will tell their stories as well. And then this is essentially what we call the lobby visit roadmap. It's like the suggested agenda for how to conduct a good lobby visit. So after the welcome and the introductions, we really suggest giving a good thank you. That's the third dot point there. This just saying thank you for something to start the meeting, even if it's just, we're so grateful that you've taken time to meet with us, or we really appreciate your co-sponsorship of this bill. Just really, I've seen staffers kind of relax when I thank them for something in a lobby meeting, because I think a lot of meetings they have are not so relationship building or not so kind. And so to be, right off the bat, thanks for something changes the tone, and they open up a little bit more, which is exciting. Then you introduce your specific ask, so they know exactly what you're asking for. Staff have about 5 to 10 minutes to follow up on your meeting before they go to the next meeting or the next thing they have to do. So if it's clear and concise, chances they'll follow up are a lot higher. And then sharing a couple of those stories to center and humanize the issue is next. And then a really valuable part, like the North Carolina example I shared, where they wanted to hear from some people with military experience. that comes out of dialogue. So after you've shared your ask and your stories, take a moment to say, you know, how are you responding to our ask? You know, are you favorable to it? What would you need to hear to get to yes? You know, questions like that can be really helpful in getting a sense of where the office is. So after you've used your time to have some dialogue, you can repeat the ask and thank you, and then send your thank you after that. And if that's a lot, you can think of the beginning as the thank you and the ask, and the middle as the stories, and the end as the discussion. All right, well, let's head next to some important things to know. If you have questions on the lobby visit roadmap, I'll save some time here at the end. I just want to get through these last few slides. But every month, advocacy teams have 2 meetings, the first of which is with hundreds of advocacy team members across the country, and we all jump on Zoom together the first Wednesday of the month, and we have, you know, an expert on the issue or a member of Congress join us to give an update on where the campaign stands, and you get to ask questions about the issue live. And then, sorry, this is a little confusing, but the second meeting will be your local team meeting. But then this communicator call here is for team leaders, or if you'd like to come, it just gives another opportunity to get a policy update and to hear some stories from around the country, and usually a training maybe on media or on a new lobbying skill as well. So I actually misspoke. There's 3 calls, but the 2 that you may want to think about are the national call and the local advocacy team call. Also, I'm going to put this link in the chat at the end of our call, or in the follow-up email. We have a team toolkit where we sort of try to centralize all of the resources that we have for you to draw on as you do this work. We have, easier to show you here, we have places that you can submit reports for the activities you do, and that helps us kind of collect what's going on and send suggestions back out to you. We have the opportunity to look at our recent calls. So we had Senator Merkley from Oregon speak on our January call, and back in December we had Representative Tlaib on our call. We've also had folks from the State Department speak and other experts on the policy. And this is really a great part of the website to look at. Each month we put out an action sheet, which kind of has the latest on the campaign. And so you don't have to do a lot of research to lobby, and you don't have to be an expert. If you've got your story and your action sheet, you're good to go. And the action sheet has the ask and a couple facts and good information to take. And then there's a lot more in-depth information on the campaign if you want to take a look at that. We have other resources here where the lobby visit roadmap is here for your viewing. And then, the congressional staff, you can learn about congressional staff and learn a little bit, research your member on the FCNL website, and even get an intro into the campaign. And elsewhere, I don't think I have a slide for this, but we have a sample lobby visit video. So if you're curious what a lobby visit feels and looks like, we did kind of a simulation at the beginning of the year, about 15 or 20 minutes, if you want to watch that. So last but not least, I want to drop a link in the chat here and invite you to just click this so you have it, but I'll also include it in the follow-up email. But this is a quick link I'll encourage you to fill out. It should take about 30 seconds. And this just lets me know, are you on a team? Do you need to be connected to a team? What's your zip code so I can make sure to connect you? So this is just a follow-up. Fill this out. and just let me know and I'll follow up with you to get you connected to the right, so you can meet your local team. But without further ado, we have a couple minutes here for questions. I saw one here in the chat from Katie. Should we send a personal thank you note to the senator or the staffer? Excellent question. So usually the person who sets up the meeting will have the email address of the staffer. And so we encourage sending a thank you to that staff member, because you've already been communicating with them and just thanking them for the visit, repeating your ask, and then maybe attaching the action sheet or something. And we actually have a sample follow-up email template on the website that you can use too. That's a great question. And the 2 states without advocacy teams. Excellent question. If anybody knows anyone in Mississippi, South Dakota, or I have to think here. This is my colleague's wheelhouse here.
According to the national call, those were the only 2.
Okay, maybe we just launched one in North Dakota and Delaware. So those are recent, but yeah, we're getting really close. So that's exciting. Let's see, Jeff, go ahead.
Just going back a little bit, I thought, Katie's point regarding the just the different consciousness in Arizona. And we're having a really good conversation, really connected with Senator Kristen Gillibrand, on an issue. Would it be appropriate to do something like, Senator Gillibrand, we're on the same page, but the other Kristen, was it Kristen Sinema or something? She's not quite there yet. Would it be okay for you to, Kirsten, is that her name? Kirsten, would you have a conversation with her about this? And can I get back to you on that conversation? How that went? Would that be an appropriate use of our time?
No, that would be excellent, actually. I like the way you're thinking. So that's one of the things you can do if your member is on board. So you can say, oh, Senator Gillibrand, next time you run across Senator Sinema from Arizona, would you have a conversation with her about the peace voting accounts? Absolutely, that's wonderful. And you can even research if they're on the same committee or whatever. But yeah, our teams have done that. They found each other on our online community or heard about each other on the call. And they say, oh, I think it was between maybe Wisconsin and Michigan or something. They had this whole thing about, trying to lobby each other's senators. So it's really strategic and really smart to do that. So.
And we did have a conversation with Kirsten Sinema about 2 weeks ago. A lobbying call on this, so you could just ask her maybe to follow up with the senator on our call.
Yeah, and then you can email and follow up and say, hey, did you have that conversation? Totally, yeah. That's what's exciting about being part of this big network is, suddenly it's not just us over and over doing the same thing by ourselves with one senator, but we're part of this 48 state movement to build peace and justice. So, yeah. Well, I realize we're at time, and I realize there might be another question or two, so I can stick around. But I just want to thank you so much for coming. It's just been a joy to get to know you all. I'm going to pause the recording here. Don't forget to follow up with the form, and I'll hang out for another 5 minutes or so if there's any questions. But thank you, and good night.